We're back again for another COVID cabal. Not going to be a long COVID cabal. Last time we had like a monster. We had a monster COVID cabal last time. If you guys remember that, it was like almost 2 hours long. And I got to be honest with you guys. Well, let's get some people here. Let's see who we got on first. I'll start talking. I'm gonna save my voice. I'm gonna start talking when we get 20 or so people in. Drop stuff in the chat when you're in. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Where my people at? Alan, Roman, what's up, my mans? What is up? It's good to see you. Let's go. Rudy, ARVP, Curtis. Gang's all showing up. Base Lifter, how are you, my man? Hey, if you're in here, drop it in the chat. If you're in, drop it in the chat. Wait till we get to about 20. Well, what I was saying though, just before I think anybody even got in here, it's going to be a shorter one. The last show was wild, man. What a marathon. T. Ogden, my man, what's up? It's good to see you. Last show, almost 2 hours. It's probably got to be up there with one of our longest ones yet. I got to be honest with you guys. Look, I love you. I'm not gonna hide anything. You guys probably saw it anyway. I was getting drunk at the end there. I'm either pretty clean or maybe got a little bit of a light buzz. Man, I was getting looped at the end. I don't even think I remember the very end of that COVID cabal. I just remember it like I had to end it out. I had to end it. I think that it was the move downstairs. I took like one puff of that pipe. I barely even smoked it. I like dumped it. I didn't even finish what I was drinking. I was like I just dumped it. It's like, dude, what happened? It just hit. It just hit like that. It was a mistake going down. I should have just enjoyed the. I think we were at a good peak when we were in the office, and going downstairs was a little ambitious. But I have to tell you, look, sometimes you celebrate. It was very good news last time with Elon. It was very good news. But as you guys can tell from this one, I'm not as I'm not my throat's a little messed up. So I'm not going to be able to go as long even if I wanted to. This is going to be a very topic specific check-in because obviously this is, and you guys, if you have other stuff you want to cover, just drop it in the chat. But obviously, what we got here is a fairly interesting development, I would say. So let's just get to the main point, though. Okay, there was leaks from the Supreme Court that they were planning on overturning Roe versus Wade, and this is, of course, a huge thing because the Supreme Court is supposed to be very collegial. And in spite of all of the, you know, two sides of the aisle crap around the country, the Supreme Court, there's sanctity in the Supreme Court, right? This is the whole thing. The Supreme Court wasn't touched by it. Well, of course, we know that looks like the Supreme Court's probably compromised. We know that we can go all the way back to the election and why they didn't vote on that Texas suit. I think you guys can remember that. Those of you guys, who've been around, you guys remember that show probably. That was a big show. Um, but we were all shocked by it. We were all shocked by that outcome. It seemed very unlikely that they would do that because, we thought we had people on our side in there. But reality is that I am only convinced about two justices, right? There's always been the rumors about Roberts, okay? Well, but um, what's interesting is that this whole thing came out right at the time of this all came out right when 2000 Mules came out. So there was a lot of hype around this movie 2000 Mules, which of course goes into, I won't say of course, a lot of you guys may not even know about it. It's only going to be in select theaters, but it deals with all the individuals, the mules, who essentially stole the 2020 election, right? Stuff ballots, places, et cetera, et cetera. So, so that movie came out damning findings. I mean, essentially shows the theft in just one of the in this just as one capacity. Of course, we know it was stolen in multiple ways, and then this happens the same day, right? Changes the news cycle. Now, there are two things going on here, and they're connected. This is my perspective. I'm going to just throw this out there. I do think that there's the distraction element, and I do think that this has the benefit of creating, division in the Supreme Court. That's another institution that collapses, right? The Supreme Court. J.L. Newman, in all honesty, I don't. I actually don't. And I'm happy you made that comment. I mean, a lot of people are saying it's a distraction. And I think that they're right, but I also think it's overstated. On a slow news day, though, on Twitter, you would see people like Cernovich, Posobiec, etc. They would all be talking about 2000 Mules. It would start to move through the broader conversation. Is it going to be on CNN or even Fox News? Maybe on Tucker. But the answer is really no. And so you're right to be suspect of it. The reality is that as long as media companies are in the hands of these people, it's tough to get through the mind control. And I think the only thing that's really going to do it in the end is the big economic collapse and perhaps massive military defeat of the United States. Both of which, by the way, are coming. They're coming. So, but let me stay focused here. This is another institution, perhaps the last institution that is. Oh, by the way, I didn't show you guys. We've got a Friuli Colli Orientale here, Sauvignon Blanc from northeastern Italy, Friuli. Very nice. Very nice, easy drinking. Not too heavy, 12.5%, like where I like it. Oh man, my throat's really giving out on me. Well, Jeff, you didn't really miss too much. Don't worry about it. It's good to see you here, by the way. Haven't forgotten about your box wine, Jeff. So, Supreme Court, last institution collapsing, right? Last main institution having all of its problems and not being able to work together. But here's what I would say also about this. We've now hit a turning point. And I think you guys felt it with Musk buying Twitter. And it's a turning point that we haven't had. I think it was Mark Andreessen said it, which pretty much mirrored what we were talking about here. Biggest shift since Trump ran for president or won presidency. Biggest vibe shift since Trump ran. So Musk is certainly doing good stuff, and he's bringing attention to the right things. But here's an important thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to tie this all together, right? Musk, these people understand the pull between good and evil. They understand the sort of cycles, and actually, what they do is you could say that they're people who surf the cycles. They create the waves and they ride the waves, and so they keep us in this perpetual little loop where things are getting bad. Oh, now things are going to get good, right? This is the sort of great turning cycles that are about every 80 to 90 years. So this is how it plays out. Musk, God damn, this throat is really. I'm pushing through it. I'm pushing through it. But I got an interview tomorrow, so I'm like, oh shit. Musk is one of these individuals, possibly. Maybe he's not one of these individuals, but he certainly benefited in his businesses from a lot of, you know, the tax credits, etc. He's a transhumanist. I'm still skeptical of him. Not that I'm unhappy with him. I'm just skeptical. Neutrally polarized individual, perhaps, just has his own little agenda and doesn't like free speech being stifled. Fair enough, right? But I think it's also important to look at the fact that they would bring us to a certain point before people start to snap, and then they start to ease off the pressure, and they'll throw some of their own people under the bus. Like, I think this is the fundamental concept between first and second beast anyway, is that, even without getting into too much in the details, that you have the overt bad guys, and then you have the guys who look good because they took down the bad guys, but really they're part of the same club. So it remains to be seen about that with Musk. He's certainly saying all the right stuff. Very positive about him, really positive about what he's been doing. I'm super happy about it. Don't get me wrong. I'm looking just down the line. But now we heard the announcement today that Peter Thiel and his group are going to buy Disney. And Disney, of course, is not just Disney. Disney is media, because Disney owns most of the media corporations. So we may end up seeing the media shift here. The big question that we have to keep in mind is, are all these things kind of controlled demolitions that they give us a little bit, but we're still, and they'll throw the worst offenders under the bus. We think that we're winning again, but we're moving more into the society that they want to create for us, versus our own society that actually has real, genuine freedom and, is more decentralized, right? A lot of us are inclined to take, in these times, a benevolent centralization, at least seemingly benevolent centralization, over a negative one. And in the short term, I certainly am too, but long term, we want to break the system altogether. We don't want to, there's all these people talking about, CBDCs aren't going to be actually bad because the banks will be run by different people. Like, fuck that shit. I don't want that. I don't want that. So it will be interesting to see how that stuff plays out and the connection with all this stuff. But let me just answer these questions first. First, Castells, I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, we've been rolling with this since March 2020. Long road here, through a lot of ups and downs. Sammy, does my gut tell me that we will experience second beast before this mess is cleaned up? My gut actually tells me no, we won't. I don't really buy into that scenario. I think Musk is neutrally polarized, and I think that he has an agenda, but I don't think it's not an agenda that I agree with. But also don't think he's going to try to force people into it. I don't see how he could. My perspective is that a sort of false awakening, controlled opposition thing won't work because we're in a different state than before. You go back to the last third turning after the Nazis, it worked because a lot of people, we were dealing with what seemed like, oh wow, these people are evil, we stopped them, good, we're the good guys. The awareness is so deep now. The fact that we're even having this conversation exists in the public 90, 80, 90 years ago. It didn't. It didn't. There's no way that they can pull the wool over our eyes because our perception, our consciousness has shifted such that there are a solid 20% at this point, if not 30%, who just are able to see through it quickly. And not to say they get everything right, but they see through the bullshit. None of us are falling for savior complex stuff, whether it's Musk or whether it's Trump. So I don't think it's going to happen uh, because I don't think people are going to buy it. I don't think they're going to buy it. That's my perspective. Um, you know, Musk says that, oh, we want free speech on Twitter, but you just gotta, hey, and by the way, here's a chip for your brain that's gonna make you even more free in the network. No one's gonna buy that shit. That's why I think it's important to know who you're dealing with. I've never. Okay, let me give a normie explanation of Musk. All right, let's talk. Let's be very normie for a second here. Because I'll say this: I love my conspiracy guys, but there is a sense of jadedness among people who have been in the conspiracy world for too long, having followed too many people who turned out to be con artists or didn't know what they were talking about or whatever, making up stuff, assets, and also just waiting too long that they they don't they're not able to even operate with it anymore. So they actually have this jaded position and they basically believe that everything is bad. Everything's controlled, everything sucks, there's no way out of it. And I don't really feel that in my heart. If I'm in my head, I can get really lost because as you're just saying here, Tony, um, it's it's really like there you can't actually wrap your head around it. And a lot of it's by design. It's so obscured, your head will never be able to figure out whether somebody's good or whether they're bad. Um, you can only use emotional, empathetic perception. You have to read someone's energetic field. This is what I call discernment. It's not or like a deeper level of it because you can't really discern an individual unless you can empathize with them. Let me give like an example. And we're not going to talk about this on the show, but unless you guys have some very brief comments. But with Russia, the reason that people don't understand what's going on in our foreign policy establishment and everything, because not all of them are, you know, in on the agenda exactly. A lot of them are just stupid, right? They're sociopaths. They follow their, masters, their inner group. There's no empathy. Nobody's able to empathize with Russia. I don't I don't I'm an American, okay? I want to make America great again. My lineage is in America. It's always been in America. My family came over to America at the very fucking beginning of America, 1630s, 1632, I think. I had, one of my ancestors died in Philip's War. A lot of guys maybe don't know that. It was like a massive war in New England against the Indians. Like a third of the colonists in New England died in it. It was brutal. Okay, uh, I'm 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 here. Russia has its own legacy, and I respect it. But I'm not Russian. But I have empathy for Russia. I empathize for their position. I can empathize, and so because I can empathize, I can understand. I can read them. I can feel them. I can feel, hey, yeah, that's what he's feeling. So if I'm gonna make a normie take on Musk, I think Musk has Asperger's. I think he's a genius. I think he has Asperger's. I think somebody who has Asperger's, is going to, look at the women he's been with. He doesn't know how to read women at all. He's with BPD, histrionic personality disorder, Amber Heard, followed by like goth witch Grimes. I mean, I don't think he really understands women or understands emotions. So, is that surprising then that he would feel inclined to think that the answer for us is to be integrated? Like, it's a very logical answer to a problem. Oh, like text becoming too great. Logically, we need to get out of this by getting, Neuralink. Let me make it happen so that, like, I actually, to be honest, I have not gotten negative intent from him with it. Now, it scares the fuck out of me to actually have it, but I haven't gotten negative intent. I don't see Musk ever making any sort of statement that people should be forced on it. I think that, that's a lot of how his mind thinks. And maybe it's going to change as this goes on. Maybe he's going to start to feel differently. A lot of us are waking up on our own ways. Is it possible? I know this sounds so normie and so naive, but let's just consider it for a second. Is it a possibility? I We're going to wait and see. It's important to know who you're dealing with. It's important not to say, hey, Musk, no, Musk is great. He's great. I don't know that. I'm just telling you that I don't feel negative intent from him. I don't feel any sort of, open-hearted intent either, because, but I don't feel negativity from him. And I'll also say this. For all the arguments about regulatory capture with him, that Musk has been, leveraging all the subsidies and taking advantage of the space program, and people have been saying, well, that means he's part of them. But I'm sorry, it's different than like if you're Zuckerberg and you're handed a DARPA project. And this is one of the things that 107 was saying, that, oh, well, Zuckerberg was given Facebook. Musk makes cars because, there's electric subsidies. So he has an advantage. And, he's able to do SpaceX because NASA was taken down. He has an advantage because there's all these subsidies for private spacecraft. But, respectfully to Juan, well, so fucking what? So what? A bunch of people create subsidies for some project, and you have you have the entrepreneurial spirit to take advantage of them. Does that make you a crook? No, it doesn't make you a fucking crook. And it doesn't make you a loser. A lot of business success is finding opportunities and advantages and using them to your advantage. And I'm sorry, I know that he struggled quite a bit, particularly with SpaceX. Now, of course, we could just be watching media show and it was all bullshit, designed to create the hero. I'll just tell you, though, that, like, again, I don't feel negative intent from him. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, he's using their scam against them. Why not? I mean, Teslas are well-built cars. Okay, he's had massive advantages versus other auto producers because he took advantage of those subsidies far more. Again, so fucking what? I think Juan's biased because he likes cars. He's old school Americana. I think that he finds some of this stuff offensive. It's fair enough. But I'm just making an objective statement. Starting a company and taking advantage of subsidies to gain a competitive advantage is not the same thing as being handed a DARPA project. They're not remotely in the same ballpark. They're not remotely in the same ballpark. You can say it's unfair, but everybody knows Musk works around the clock. Nobody really knows much about Zuckerberg. Okay? And I can tell you, if I look at Musk and I see Asperger's, a difficulty connecting with people, I don't see evil. I see maybe a misunderstood individual. With Zuckerberg, I don't see a soul. I mean that. I don't see a soul in Zuckerberg. It's a kind of evil that's almost more strange from a more overt demon, because I don't see a person really there with Zuckerberg. It's possible that there's some very suppressed, misunderstood individual beneath it all. Yeah, Jeff, I agree. I agree with you. But most of what Musk makes requires central corporate control, cars, battery. Yeah, I agree. I don't like the system. I don't like the system. But my perspective, and I know I mentioned it last time, is we have this right now in the short term. He's helping us out. Is Musk himself going to be wedded to that centralized control? My suspicion is he's not. My suspicion is that Musk is not trying to hold power. That's my suspicion. And you guys know as well as I do that, you know me well enough that the second I see it happen, I'm going to move against it. I want to make some statements about it. If Musk starts saying, oh, well, the only way that we can have this perfect future is that, everything's on, controlled by these centralized groups. But you can't, that's a different story. But right now, you can't fault people from being successful in the system. As it said, Trump was also involved with the system, because you can't make that kind of money unless you do have a level of connection to it. Like, we have to be realistic here. I don't want to go negative conspiracy brain. And we'll take our enemies as we have them, right? Now, we got so sidetracked on Musk and everything. Well, that's exactly right, Castoles. I mean, it's easier to deal with good guys than it is with bad guys, because bad guys are trying to kill you. These quote-unquote good guys, at least they're not doing that on the surface, and you can challenge them. You can use, oh yeah, we're on your side, here's free speech, and you can say, okay, well, I don't agree with this, and we're going to push this other direction. And then what are they going to do? They're going to become the bad guys again? You can kind of call their bluff. You can use the free speech stuff against them. So we'll see. But anyway, we talked about Musk and everything. We got sidetracked here. I got sidetracked. But the reason I went down this path talking about, Peter Thiel with Disney, which is maybe bigger, depending on what you want to say, than Musk Twitter. I think they're all kind of comparable, to be honest. The big thing here is with the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court goes for Roe versus Wade. Now, look, let's talk about abortion real quick for a second here. I want to say a couple things. And I know that you guys are not standard Twitter audience, so you'll probably be closer to my perspective or more open than the general manosphere. But, okay, I believe that abortion is murder. I believe it's murder. Yet, because that's just a logical position. It's, you are cutting off life. You're cutting off a life. That's what you're doing. But here's the nuance part of it. Or maybe we won't use the term murder necessarily. I think it's pretty close to being the right word. But you're killing. Let's say that. You're killing. You're taking a life. There's no question life begins at conception. It's nonsense to believe otherwise. It doesn't make any fucking sense logically. You can't mark it from other barometers. You have heartbeat, you have birth, etc., which are increasing tiers of humanity, connection emotionally, but they're not logical arguments. Life begins at conception. But here's the flip side. Is it reasonable in some cases to take a life? We have laws providing for self-defense. You can take a life in self-defense. If you're a soldier in the military, you can take a life. And, famous quote from Thin Red Line, right? I killed a man. Worst thing you can do, and nobody can touch me for it. So, abortion is taking a human life, but should it be illegal? I'm pretty open-minded with the first trimester. I think life is complicated. I think, do I feel comfortable forcing a woman to carry a baby to term when she was raped? I know that these are very small amounts of the abortion, by the way. I know that. Like 3 or 4% maybe. But I'm just making these kind of points that I am not an abortion maximalist, a pro-life maximalist. And I've stayed out of the whole argument because I understand some personal considerations. I understand. I've some clients have dated women who have had an abortion. It's not super common. Your average woman doesn't do it, and if she does it, doesn't like that she did it. Now, here's the thing though. We know abortion is a death ritual for them. We know that it's one of the big satanic things that they do. And look, I think it is an evil across the board. Do I necessarily think that a woman in the first, trimester max, first 2 months, my wife has miscarried, and the doctor got actually upset at me because when my wife went in there and we found out, this was before our daughter was born, and it's fine, it's natural for, especially before you have children, to have a miscarriage at first. It's kind of considered sometimes to be cleaning out of the system or something. Hey, let's do a test and make sure everything's functioning properly. But she was given an abortifacient. Now, they said, this will help clear it out because it was blighted ovum. You guys can look it up. It's basically just, the development of the baby stopped. And it stopped at a very basic level. There was barely any progress. And it was like a shell, basically. And so your body will eventually get rid of it, but you can take a medication that induces it. And I said to the doctor, is that the same kind of thing that you would do to induce an abortion? And she glared at me and she said, yeah, but this isn't, and basically in that I would use that terminology because, it had to be medically correct. And what I mean by that is I think that she was super pro abortion and she didn't like me crossing context with the term. But it was the same kind of category of drugs. And look, you have an abortion at that point. It's just it's a crappy experience for the woman to go through it. But it's basically like a heavy period, is what it basically is. You got a lot of clumps of crap coming out, but it's a heavy period. Now, and I agree, it isn't our fight against abortion so much as shutting down the trafficking of body parts than it is about controlling what a woman does with her body. I agree, and that's the big thing here. Look, this is not as if we're reasonable people having a reasonable discussion in good faith that should we allow in should we socially, push heavily against this, but allow it to happen under these certain conditions without sort of judicial punishment. That's not the world we're operating in right now. We're not operating in that kind of world. What we're operating in is with sick, disgusting fucking people who are using this stuff for ritual sacrifice. And I know that if you're going to work at Planned Parenthood, it's like a rite of passage to have an abortion. They are excited for you when you have an abortion. And it's considered to be like a great thing to do. The women who work at those locations, don't let anybody tell you any different. They are demon-infested people. They are evil, evil people. Okay, I'm not talking about all the women who go there, some of whom are in difficult situations, and I do have empathy for them, believe it or not. A lot of them I have empathy for, and I don't judge them for the choice. I mean that. I don't judge them for the choice. I don't agree with it, but I don't judge them for it. It's not my place to judge. But the people who work there, evil, evil people. Almost to the person, I would say. Yeah, priestesses of Moloch. And let's go further with this. Where are we at right now? I remember when we were talking about first-term abortions, and then, well, maybe second term if the woman's life is at risk. And then you're like, well, okay, I guess that is possible. And then you find out, oh, wait, it's like psychological health. Well, what does that mean exactly? Like, second term, that's the second trimester, that's pretty far along. Later end of the second trimester today, babies can even be alive at this point. Now we're at the point where you have multiple states that are trying to make abortion legal, not only up until birth, but even after birth. And I saw a testimony, I don't know where that was, but I think it was California, but I'm not sure, grilling, this woman who is pushing for the bill, right? The person who had proposed it. I don't know if it was an official state representative or some other organization. I think it was another organization that proposed it. But that really making her say, if the woman on the birthing table says, this is stressful, and the doctor agrees that that's a psychological reason to kill the baby, that the baby could be killed. What kind of fucking person do you have to be to support this stuff? And this is what I said on Twitter. The time of explaining, if you were still doing it, the time of being shy about, well, here's why I supported Trump, this reason. You have nothing to explain yourself about. They have everything to explain themselves about. If you meet some lefty who wants to come at you with some moral superiority and question about your voting choices, just say, do you support a baby being killed in the birthing table? Do you support live birth abortion at 40 weeks? No, if the mother's... No, do you support if the mother says, I don't feel like it? Make them squirm. Do you support cutting off a kid's, genitals at age 5? No fucking quarter. No fucking quarter for these people. No fucking quarter for them. I mean, I'm not saying go pick these fights necessarily. not trying to be combative. I'm just saying that, if you happen to be involved in any way with a lefty who's trying to make you feel like you have things to answer for, this isn't like 2020 where they still had some plausible deniability. I mean, we knew it was bullshit, but they could feign it. Now we know exactly what's going on. Okay. So, with all that stuff on abortion said, and this is one of my more controversial takes, and I'm going to mention it here. It's a more controversial take, but I want to say it because I'm aware of this. Okay, we talked about Musk, Teal, the flip, right? Are they trying to burn their vanguard, so to speak, right? Oh, Jeff, that's powerful stuff, man. That's powerful stuff. Wow. But this is it, right? This is the reason why if somebody doesn't want a child, how difficult is it or how difficult should it be for them to be able to put the child up for adoption? That's, you know, because there's so many lives that have been saved, so many amazing things that people have been able to do as a result of it. So, thank you for saying that, Jeff. I appreciate it. I appreciate that. So the reason I mentioned this whole stuff, though, and this is going to be a controversial take, is all right. Supreme Court. We already kind of felt that it was um, compromised, right? Maybe as many as only Alito and Thomas were not compromised, right? We're looking at maybe 7 out of 9 to some degree compromised because they've on key issues voted with the regime. So let's see here. Is this a divide and conquer strategy? Now I have to say this. I know it's controversial to say it, but is the overturning of Roe versus Wade a honest to God organic thing to come up from this Supreme Court, or is the whole thing another? Let's create more division, and then the good side will win in the end, right? And we'll switch this stuff. Now, I'm not necessarily that cynical, but I felt like I had to mention it because it I have to mention it because there are a lot of lefties who might have been uncomfortable with a lot of things that the Roe v. Wade thing will repolarize a lot of people who are moving away from the left. Now, will it permanently do that? You know, I can tell you, despite my little monologue at the beginning, right? I mean, given that they're trying to do these live birth abortions and late term abortions and post birth abortions, I mean, I don't really give a shit anymore about it. I don't give a shit about it. So, I is this another way of trying to polarize the public? Is it another way of trying to? I don't know. I haven't had my mind made up on it. I am a, I have a bit of cynicism though about the Supreme Court going after Roe versus Wade. And just hear me out, okay? Because, like I said, abortion isn't my hill to die on, so to speak. It never has been. And so, given all the other things, this seems like one that's going to create maximum polarization rather than, dealing with the stuff from like 2000 Mules, so to speak, right? Dealing with election fraud. I don't know. I guess we'll see what the results are. But you can see as a result of this that all sorts of people who I know some people in real life who I haven't spoken to. Obviously, this is recent news. Who we were all on the same page with the vax, with everything, with the war, with all the bullshit, the economy. But now that they're doing, we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, it's like the conservative boogeyman's back. Does this work in their favor? Or is that at least their attempt? Now, will it ultimately work in their favor? Probably not. And let's also remember, by the way, guys, that Roe versus Wade simply made it so that every state had to offer some form of abortion. It was basically like creating an amendment to the Constitution that thou shalt be able to abort a babies in any state. Getting rid of Roe versus Wade doesn't mean that abortion is illegal across the United States. It means that it's not illegal for a state to ban abortion. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. But nevertheless, the symbology of it is such. I'll just be honest, I don't want the conservative boogeyman to sabotage the situation. And I don't trust people like Kavanaugh or Amy Coney Barrett, who didn't show up at all when it mattered on every single other issue, including the vaccine, to suddenly come in and say, well, now we're going to outlaw Roe versus Wade. I don't know. Well, Jeff, I heard this about Jane Roe, and I also heard something, and I have no idea if knowing this is true. It's literally like a tweet, but that was a scam too. She was doing that for money, and that was on her deathbed that she said that. I don't believe that story, to be honest. It's much more plausible that, she actually did have contrition over it. Because let's be honest, we know that unless you are going down the path of worshiping the devil, whether you know it or not, right? No woman's happy about her abortion. I would say the majority feel very bad about it. And then there's maybe, 50% feel like regret it or feel terrible about it. And then you have, we'll just use thirds. They're not accurate, but let's say 1/3 serious regret, 1/3, not regret, but found the process bad. Isn't going to dwell on it, but certainly considered it to be a dark moment in their life. And then 1/3 that's like, yeah, let's fucking do it again, or who cares, my body, right? So, so the question here, though, was that, do I have any thoughts on the Vax documents that dropped? I don't know anything about it. So, there's stuff dropping all the time. And if anything, if it was to distract from anything, I would say it's got to be from the 2000 Mules. Just because that was by far the biggest thing that was getting hyped up. Pfizer reported big profits. So, anyway, guys, those are the main topics I wanted to cover. Please feel free to drop some more questions in here. I have still a glass of wine, and I think my voice is manageable right now. So, we'll any other questions? Any other questions here? A lot's been going on. Oh, there is one thing I should talk about. I don't think I talked about it yet. Foreign policy stuff. You guys know, months ago, I talked about the possibility of Poland moving troops into Western Ukraine to form a protectorate in Galicia, etc. That remains a possibility. And Actually, it's moved from possibility to much higher probability because all the soldiers have been mobilized to be both in the northeast and southeast. We don't know exactly where. Northeast would mean that they're prepping for the Suwalski Gap. The Suwalski Gap, by the way, is the gap between Poland and Lithuania that cuts off Kaliningrad from Belarus. So we've heard that they were moving units there. We also heard that they were moving them to the south for a possible move in the western Ukraine. Similarly, we've also heard about there being, we had some threats against Transnistria, in the breakaway part of Moldova, and some terrorist activity there. There's big ammunition dumps in Transnistria with the kind of munitions that the Ukrainians need. It's plausible that they would go in there to take it for many reasons. Rumors of Romanian troops being disguised as Moldovan troops. Because, guys, Moldova has almost no military at all. Moldova is almost demilitarized, you could say. Interesting little fact, Transnistria had the Air Force. No, I'm mixing this up. Moldova had the Air Force. Transnistria had the army, I think, at the breakup of the Soviet Union. And so that was one of the big things that Moldova couldn't retake Transnistria because they only had the Air Force. Most of the army had stayed in Transnistria and aligned with it. So the branches split during the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Transnistria is Russian, okay? A lot of these problems, you don't have to give Stalin any positive perks. Stalin reorganized most of Europe on ethnic lines. And actually that created a lot of stability in Europe, but he didn't do it within the Soviet Union itself. And whether that was deliberate or not, the Baltics obviously had tons of Russians, and he added from, Bessarabia was west of the Dniester River. So, I don't know the exact rationale why he decided to append this sliver on the opposite side, but it wasn't initially ever part of it. When we say Romania had Moldova, Romania, in the interwar years, and that Moldovans are Romanian, Transnistria was never part of that Romania because the population there is there's hardly any Romanians there. Anyway, though, we have in this situation, we have two potentially separate fronts that could open up. I'm going to tell you guys that I think it's going to happen. And I think it's going to happen because they're not going to quit. They're going to keep going. They're not going to quit. They're not going to stop trying to escalate it. I think what they're waiting for is when the Ukrainian troops in the Donbass, and by the way, guys, it's by all reports, what's going on to the Ukrainian forces there, it's brutal. They're getting smashed. And the Russians, they keep, the Western media is much more quiet about it for this reason. But to the extent they say anything, they say Russians are stalled in the Donbass. The Russians just aren't. Why advance more than you have to when you can just continue to shell the right positions and save manpower? I mean, the Russians are already fighting with 1/3 of the manpower of the Ukrainians. Nobody knows that because they assume the Russians are going to fight with more because they're a bigger country. But they're fighting with 1/3 of Ukrainian manpower. The Ukrainians at this point have already suffered upwards of 20,000 casualties, like deaths. Not just regular casualties. Deaths and serious injuries. At least 20,000 at this point. And it's mounting. And there's been a lot of surrenders, and the only reason there haven't been more surrenders, from my understanding, is that because they've embedded, commissars, so to speak, in every unit, so that if you were to try to go surrender, they'd kill you. My question, is I wonder how long it's going to take before the Ukrainian general soldiers themselves kill these people, kill the commissars. Because it's a rough situation. But the brainwashing is really strong, and I heard this from I forget his name. His name's Andre. He runs a soccer blog. He's very very good with military tech and everything like that. And he said the only thing the Russians were surprised about was how brainwashed the Ukrainians were, to the extent that even when Ukrainians are taken prisoners, they think that they're like going to get killed or eaten alive or anything, and they're shocked when they're actually treated decently. So anyway, but the point of this is that the war is going to escalate. The war is going to escalate. I I know that there's a lot of people who say it won't do that because NATO can't win a war against Russia, which is true. They can't win a war against Russia, but because they don't have the forward deployment. Even if they were prepared to do it with what they have, they don't have any forward deployment. Their air force has run out of munitions. They don't have any tanks in Europe. There's a lot of and also they can't defend against Russian missiles because the hypersonic missiles are too fast. And the next generation of Russian hypersonic missiles have been tested right now, and they're even more dangerous. The Zircons versus the Kinzhals. So there's really no way for, NATO hasn't fought against a non-backwards army ever. Ever. They've never fought directly against a country that could in the first minutes of the war, degrade their ability to communicate, their anti-air defenses. There's a couple of smart individuals within NATO, who have said as much. And they've all basically said the same thing, which is that in the first days of a war against Russia, conventional war, NATO should expect 40,000 dead in the first few days. Do you think for a second that the political apparatus here can sustain that? Russia can sustain it, but we can't sustain it. There's no question about it. And it's not even a matter of even the morale, because that would be just the beginning. We don't have the capacity to beat Russia in a war. I know that people don't want to believe that because we've been so puffed up. Even though we lost Afghanistan in 48 hours, we've been so puffed up that America can't be beaten. And that's the worst position to be in. It's the worst position to be in. I'm very frightened. The only thing that I can say for our perspective I think is going to be good is I don't know how bad it will be for the U.S. I'm more inclined to think that the U.S. makes the I'm more inclined to think that the U.S. lies to Poland and Romania, convinces them. In Poland, it'll be easier because Kaczynski is obsessed with taking back these lands. I'm going to make a comment on that, but they're going to get hit hard, and then U.S. isn't going to come to their rescue. There might be a retaliatory attack against Kaliningrad, and then Russia's going to take the Baltics. And that's what I think is going to happen. If I have to say how I think this war in Europe will reach its worst point, I think what we're going to have happen is Poland and probably Romania are going to have precision strikes on them both and on any ground troops that enter. And I think you see then some counterattack against Kaliningrad, which is then met with the absorption of the Baltics. And I think that's as far as it goes. I think the defeat of those forces and the lack of any sort of meaningful U.S. response will probably be sufficient. But to be honest, I'm not sure, because I could see then stuff coming out with China, and I also seem to have this image of a U.S. carrier group getting sunk. I think a U.S. carrier group is going to get sunk as well. I don't know if China's going to do that, not Russia, but I don't think that Russian troops are going to occupy any part of NATO besides for the Baltics, which I think are gone. I mean, I just see this. I just see the escalation. I see either Poland or Romania moving units into Moldova and Western Ukraine, and I see response, and I see Moldova, and then I see attack on Kaliningrad from Poland, and then I see attack on the Baltics to protect Kaliningrad, and I just see it. I see it happening. Um, but the result of it is the collapse of NATO and the EU. So, and meanwhile, you have Hungary lying in wait. And Hungary is going to get Transcarpathia. I bet you anything they have an agreement with Putin. Orban's the only one in the EU who has any fucking clue about what's going on. And he's playing, I bet there was an agreement and it said, look, if you don't go against us, we're not going to disrespect your interests. That was the conversation that Putin and Orban had. It was, we will not disrespect your interests if you do not go against us in this operation. And so Orban said, we're going to criticize Zelensky, and we are not going to allow any arms to go through our country. And the result of this is going to be Orban gets most of at least Transcarpathia, and probably at the end of this, when the EU and NATO is collapsed, I bet you anything that he's going to get southern Slovakia and maybe parts of Romania. Because Hungary was Germany and Hungary were the two big Nazi countries in Central Europe. Obviously, the Germans were Nazis. After the war, the Germans were all deported from everywhere else in Europe that they were at, and they were all put into Germany. But the Hungarians, while their rump state was diminished to a very small rump state, the Hungarians were not forcibly relocated. And I don't actually know why that is, if we're being honest here. Because I don't know why Stalin didn't do that. Because he did that with every other ethnic group. The Poles were moved from Ukraine and Belarus to Poland. The Germans were moved from Poland and Prussia to Germany proper. But but Hungary is going to get its lands back, and there'll probably be some pipeline between Serbia, Hungary, and Russia that'll occur. So, the two big things in the Great Awakening, three, but the two big ones are this World War III edge of nuclear war, but collapse of U.S. hegemony, which will involve the collapse of the U.S. hegemony in Europe and the loss of Taiwan to China. That is all going to happen within the next 6 months, is my perspective. 6 months and change. And the economy is going to go the same direction as well, I think, in that time period. I think that we start to hit... And look, I've been wrong with timelines, so, take it with a grain of salt. But I'm more and more of the opinion that, to the extent that there is some, white hat military that's going to come and do arrests, that's not going to happen until next spring. I'm more and more of the opinion that we're not going to see any rescue this fall, because I think that the great awakening, this final bit of awakening for people to galvanize them to action. And there's a lot of things, right? There's January 6th, which I won't go into, obviously. There's the vaccine. But I think the big ones are going to be the massive economic collapse we're going to experience. Massive. And if you're in Europe, just like fucking say goodbye. I mean, if you're in Germany, just fucking say goodbye. All of German industry is going to collapse because it's only a matter of time before gas is shut off. And you can say that, well, maybe it won't go that far. I think it's going that far. It's going to go as far as it has to go before it goes to something that you can't go back from in terms of like nuclear, right? It's going to go that far. So we are looking at Europe getting cut off from gas. We're looking at expansion of war into NATO and in Taiwan. And we're looking at the dollar being removed as world reserve currency. And we're going to look at the midterms being stolen. And it's anybody's guess about what happens then. Because everybody's going to know at that point, you're going to have well over a majority of the public, 60%, is going to feel pretty certain that the 2020 election was stolen by the midterms. And so then when the midterms are stolen, you're going to have 80% of the public knowing that, over 80%, knowing that those were stolen. And is there going to be legitimacy in the government anymore? I mean, these are speculative questions, but I think that's where it's going. I think it's going to get really bad. I am moving away. I'm far away from the, anybody's going to rescue us. I'm more inclined at this point to think we have a really dark winter and it's not clear who's in charge. Now, is it possible that just prior or after the midterms there is that military intervention and we have like ambiguity who's in charge as a result of it throughout the winter? It's possible. But I'm more inclined to say that we are going to have to get through the winter. And come next spring, as these systems have collapsed, the military moves then. That's my perspective. Because at that point, there will be a clear consensus. So you ask me what I think, that's what I think. And I think that you're going to see fluctuations in the crypto markets. Again, not financial advice, but you're going to see fluctuations in the crypto markets. But I think in the end, you got to think big picture. If we don't have sound money, we have a recession, then we have printing, people are going to move to Bitcoin and Ethereum because they have that scarcity thing. I'm not necessarily like a long-term believer in Bitcoin or Ethereum, but I think we have to pay attention to off-ramps. It's certainly risky to put your money in a declining currency that has no backing, really, right? I know that the Fed has gold, but what I mean is that as they print it, it becomes more and more imbalanced, and now Russia and soon China, mark my words, will be officially backing their currency with gold. So, or commodities, at least commodity cluster. A lot of good comments here. Let's go through these real quick. U.S. troops are deploying to Poland. Yeah. But they're not able to do anything, and this is what people don't understand. And look, even to be fair, in the Cold War, U.S. troops were a tripwire that, if it happened, U.S. troops would have to get involved in the war. But there's no political appetite. I mean, if Poland makes an aggressive move against Russia and Russia responds, and if American troops get killed, I'm I don't think that the public is going to. I'm not saying that they're not going to be like Putin was justified in doing this. I'm not claiming that at all. But what you're going to see is them direct their anger against the regime. They're not going to direct it against Putin fundamentally. They're going to direct it against the regime. You killed American troops. We're not going to war. We're not going to lose more troops. And that's going to be across the board in society. So the SCOTUS League move everything off the screen, including Ukraine, Russia. Absolutely amazing clean wipe. Yep, they're good at it. They still are good at it. We got to give them credit. When Russia first invaded, a lot of people expected a clean and swift victory for Russia. What are your estimations now for when the conflict to end? Um, I would say, well, look, the conflict the conflict ends when NATO stops escalating it. Um, a lot of people expected it, but none of us were in Russian general staff. None of us have any idea what the Russian military was actually thinking. Um, you could look at Scott Ritter, who says that the initial attacks against Kiev and Chernigov were designed to tie up Ukrainian troops up there. Once the Ukrainians in the first few weeks lost mobility, the war was over. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. There's no way for them to move troops and munitions to get any sort of meaningful resupply. I mean, they're still getting resupplied, but nothing meaningful. And they can't fundamentally reposition a lot of the troops in the Donbass without, if they were to do a mass like, hey, we're going to completely unentrench from the Donbass and break out, they'd probably lose, if you say there's 60,000 soldiers there, they'd probably lose 20,000 in that attempted escape, but then they'd have 40,000 troops. It would actually probably create some problems for the Russians in the short term. But it would create huge narrative issues for the Ukrainians as well. I know I'm getting off topic here. I'm more speculating. I think that Russia will take an easy 6 more months to wrap the war up. I think it'll be at some point in June. We'll see the end of the Donbass front. So 1 to 2 months. Like I said, they have no reason to rush it. After Donbass, though, is going to be Kharkov and Odessa, and that's going to be June, July. There's not as many troops there, but the Russians have restraints in terms of wanting to, how much are they going to damage the cities. The Russians don't want to do Mariupol again. And then the question is what they do after that. I'm of the opinion, people disagree, they don't know. I'm of the opinion that the Russians are going to take the entire country except for those bits of Transcarpathia, because I don't think they have any other option. You can't give land to an enemy who's trying to destroy you. If the Poles and the Romanians had not aligned themselves with this regime in the States, then I think you have a completely different situation. If Poland and Romania acted like Hungary, I think it would be fairly clean. You would have southern and eastern Ukraine go to Russia. You would have Moldova and northern, Chernobyl go to Romania. You'd have Transcarpathia go to Hungary, and you'd have Poland would get Galicia and maybe Volhynia as well, right? But and then there would probably be a rump Ukrainian state that would be in Russia's orbit. That would be Kiev, right? And Zhytomyr and Chernigov. As it is, with Poland and Romania being hostile, Russia is going to be forced to adopt an aggressive position and take those territories. I don't see how they can do without it. I know that there's some people who speculate saying that, well, they'll make it their problem. No, I don't agree with that. I think that Russia waited and they know who they can work with and who they can't. And if they can't work with someone, they're not going to trust them. They're going to just do what, from their perspective, needs to be done. And I think because the NATO will continue to escalate it, that, it starts off with like the escalation ladder. Every time NATO escalates, NATO escalates the first time, they lose Crimea. They escalate the second time, they lose Donbass. They escalate the next time, they lose southern and eastern Ukraine. They escalate again, they lose central Ukraine. They escalate again, they use western Ukraine, Moldova. They escalate again, they lose the Baltics. I mean, are they going to escalate past that? I think that that'll probably be the limit. That's my perspective. I'm just trying to understand the psychology of it. But at the end of all this stuff, I mean, EU is going to be such a disaster because they're going to have. It's going to be interesting because they're going to be swarmed with migrants, but they're also not going to have any food, really. And their economy is going to be in the dumps, and their industry is going to be in the dumps. So what happens? I mean, I actually think that Europe will end up being, you're going to see a lot of internal stuff go on in Europe, and that I actually think Russia will go back towards Europe at the end of it with a totally different alignment going on. But man, we're talking like end of decade now that we have all this stuff play out. There's a lot that has to play out first. Let's see what else we got here in the comments. Jeff, you got some really good comments here. What are the chances the CCP finally collapses? Because like everybody else, I want to see the Chinese people free. People don't like being enslaved, but the Chinese have been enslaved for centuries. You know what? The truth is I don't know the answer. The CCP has these two factions, and we just don't really know from the outside exactly what's going on. Does Xi have a plan to move China into into like a non-communist kind of dynamic, or is he just trying to consolidate control for himself? I mean, I like to think that in New Earth that'll be the case. I think the CCP is going to have to collapse, or it'll evolve. Is it like this, that the CCP is going to collapse, and that you have these factions in China are trying to figure out how they're going to move things after the collapse? But I mean, China has the worst demographics in the world. Completely unsustainable demographics. Population of China is going to cut in half in the next 20 to 30 years. So, and there's 20% more men than women. So, we'll see what happens. Where did it all go wrong? 6,000 years ago, right? It's been a long time, man. If you want to go down the rabbit hole, it's been a long time. But in the States, you could say we were at war from the very beginning. But there are certain inflection points. Things certainly, I think so post-Civil War, you have the establishment of the federal district in D.C. as foreign in exchange for a loan to the crown, aka the Rothschilds. But the bigger stuff that actually happened was the Federal Reserve, I think, in the States. The central banks are probably the biggest thing. But then you have, after the central bank creation and the income tax in 1913, you then have assassination of JFK. You have 9/11. You have the stealing of the 2020 election. I mean, there's so much. Financial crisis, right? There's so much. Yeah, Medici family. Yes, Space Lifter. I have heard about that general, and I don't know anything else about it. besides for that. I've just heard there's been a lot of rumors. There's the rumors for a long time were that there were French generals in there. I mean, we know that they were really trying to break out certain individuals from the Azovstal steel factory, but we just don't know what. Yeah, we just don't know. We just don't know. We don't know the what's actually in there. There's been theories about there being more biolabs in there. I'm not personally in agreement with that, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It certainly wouldn't surprise me that there would be NATO personnel there. I just think it's been a long time rumor, and there's also other reasons that could um, explain it. But the Russians may have it already, and they may just be waiting. We'll see what they do. As for my books, Sammy, I have not started working on the last book. It's the main book I'm going to write. I'm just not ready to write it yet. I have two books right now, Kestrels. I have Tackling Texting, which is a book on texting women. It's a manual more than a book in my perspective. It's very good, very effective at that though. And then I have the Three Pillars of Attraction, which I think is a very good foundational book for my work. All you have to do is sign up for my list, www.patstedman.com/opt-in. I don't know where you found me, Castles. You're a newbie here to this group. We've had some pretty crazy ups and downs on the COVID cabal, but I'm a dating and relationship coach, and so my focus is on that. I just do these shows every once in a while, depending on what's going on. So, Jeff, the Ukrainian biolabs can be destroyed right now. The question is all the rest of the worldwide biolabs. CCP says there's 330 total. How do you destroy all of that? I don't know, man. And to be honest, I don't even know what to think about the full level of biolabs because we don't know what each of them are all doing. Like, it's reasonable to suspect that many of them, there's a number that are doing some pretty nasty stuff, but are all 330 doing the kind of stuff that, I bet you could get less than 10 are going to have all the really crazy stuff, basically. So, anyway, yeah, Castells, we've been doing this since March 2020, talking about what was going on with COVID when it happened, and we've had some pretty crazy ups and downs here, that's for sure. Been a hell of a ride, and we got more to go. Oh, my three favorite books that I didn't write. Oh God. Well, I think you're asking for nonfiction. I really can't say. I loved Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I thought was a really good way of breaking down fundamentals of philosophy for people. Obviously, Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. But God, a lot of novels. A lot of novels. Look, Donnie Darko is very keyed in, and I'll just repeat what I said. I mean, if you use logic, you're gonna find yourself spinning in circles. You got to read them by their heart. It doesn't mean to ignore the logic, but it does mean that I'm not at all convinced that Musk is a good guy, but I am. I'm not gonna. I haven't gotten the sense of any forced evil. And what else are we gonna do? We just gotta enjoy the ride, you know. Yeah, Donnie Darko's on Twitter, Jeff. Yeah, Power versus Forces by Dr. David Hawkins. Castells. It's not a novel, but read that one, and I'll see you next show. Subscribe to the channel so you can catch the next stuff that'll help explain a lot of the consciousness stuff going on. Anyway, guys, I'm out. I'll see you soon.